And you are watching the trial of William Riley Gaul in Tennessee. He is accused of killing his former girlfriend, Emma Walker, intentionally shooting a bullet through her home while she was sleeping that struck her in the head and killed her. But his defense is that this was not intentional. So we just heard from one of his friends who took the stand and says that William Gaul showed him a gun, and he went and called police. There are a lot of admissions in this case that do not look very good for William Riley Gaul. But he is trying to pose a very unique defense and say that he was some sort of man in black who concocted all of these schemes in order to get the attention of his ex-girlfriend because they were having a rocky relationship and wanted to rescue her. So he created all these dangerous, circumstances where he would have to rescue her. I'm joined by Adam Sostrin, who is a defense attorney. Hi, Adam. How are you?
Good. Good from Southern California. Great, actually.
Well, it's hot here too in New York. Now it's in the 80s.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it might actually be hotter here than by you.
Yeah, it might be, but it's more pleasant here.
Well, listen, what do you think about this defense, first of all? That he concocted all of these schemes, William Riley Gaul, so that he could rescue his girlfriend, and that the night that he shot her through her home, while her whole family, by the way, was in the home,
yeah,
that this was just part of that plan, that it was a circumstance that went wrong, and his whole motive here was to create a dangerous situation that he was going to, again, rescue her from, so that she would fall back into his arms.
Now, I'm assuming, or I don't know that he had been to the home before. The rescue operation thing, I think it would have been better understood or more accepted by a jury if the bullet didn't, in fact, hit her exactly where she was sleeping in her bed. That seems to be a bit extreme. It seems like that this is what the defense has to grasp for in this case. They have to explain this incredibly odd behavior with all these admissions and with respect to the gun, and what else do they have? It's not the best case for the defense. It's absolutely an uphill battle.
Right, and so he entered a partial guilty plea, but is trying to avoid some of the more serious charges. We actually saw this in the Sean Great case, which we're following, who's a serial killer who pled to a lot of the lesser charges, like kidnapping and abuse of a corpse and rape, but didn't actually plead to murders. Can you explain why a defendant would do something like that, take a partial plea in a circumstance like this?
They just don't want one other charge to be in front of the jury with respect to, what kind of bad conduct that they had committed. They want it to be, I guess, clear with respect to, I'm only going to be, I'm going to, in a sense, I'm going to admit to this. I'm not going to admit to these other things to show my to show what kind of conduct I engaged in. But it wasn't the type of conduct that that was so egregious. I'm not going to do that, but I'm admitting to some kind of wrongdoing.
And we saw in the Great case, we've heard that there are a lot of videos of him raping some of his victims, the one who survived and several victims that are dead. So those won't even come into play because he pled to some of these lesser charges. So do you think that was part of his motivation, that he didn't want the jurors to see that, and he thinks maybe they won't give him the death penalty, even though they're hearing all of these other sordid details about how he tortured and abused and killed women?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, you can plead now, but sentencing comes later. So with respect to, what kind of enhancement he gets, that's anyone's guess. But if that's not before the jury and the jurors are deciding whether or not that's appropriate, it certainly seems logical not to include that kind of evidence because it's so prejudicial, it's so damaging, it's so disgusting. How can the jurors ever get their minds away from something like that? So probably a smart tactic.
And so how does it work? The jurors won't even find out that that exists. Is that correct?
Correct. The defense has to be careful, what kind of questions it poses so it doesn't open up the door. But provided that doesn't occur, that evidence shouldn't come into play, right?
Yeah, and so let's go back to this case with William Riley Gaul, which we've been following. So you see the defendant's friend who took the stand and said that he showed him the gun that he used to kill his ex-girlfriend, and he ended up notifying the police. How strong is that testimony against this guy? Because, listen, he already admitted that he was holding the murder weapon. We know it was his grandfather's gun.
Right. Obviously, it shows that people that were associates of his or people that were related to him obviously had concerns with respect to his behavior that he was engaging in. And obviously, that's not helpful for the jurors to hear facts like this. And it goes towards the fact that, he was aware of the gun. He was shown the gun. It goes to, some type of premeditation. It helps the prosecutor's case in all those ways.
Okay, you know what? We actually have the live sentencing of Gloria Williams. She is a woman in Florida who abducted a baby 8 hours after the baby was born. She posed as a nurse and ended up raising this child for 18 years until she was caught. She now has her sentencing hearing, so let's tune in live.
I just need for them to set the bar for everybody else. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I can say anything. If I know I'm going to be cheated in this little short bit of time, she know where I'm coming from. I just need you to know where I'm coming from. My girl's coming. This not me sitting up here on this end of the courtroom. I never would have set up this part of it. But and I'm not really sending nobody to jail. But you sat around and watched them drive us, and you could have stopped it a long time. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I feel like you don't have to get the match. Because I almost heard if you would have brought it back in 6 months, you would have got less of time. You're not crazy for none of that type of stuff. You got pain and sin, that's why you lasted long. I wanted to study you and see what type of person you are. Just to watch you in movies. I sat up there watching the whole time. And you just as normal as I am. But you got to pay for what you did. That's what I said.
That's all coming back.
Counsel.
Can we go over here?
Of course.
And just to inform you, you are now listening to the testimony of the biological father of this young girl, Kamaya Mobley, who was stolen from the hospital right after she was born. His name is Craig Aiken. Adam, the fact that you have the parents taking the stand, and earlier we heard, and we'll replay it, some very emotional testimony from the biological mother. They've lost 18 years with their child. Thank God that they found her, but what should the punishment be? Because we heard the mother say that if it were up to her, it would be death.
This is such a tough one. I feel like this should be a Lifetime movie, right? Because not only did she do something horrible, but she sort of, in essence, with respect to the daughter, maybe made the situation not so horrible by being such a loving mother. But at the same time, the crime that was perpetrated on the parents was so awful. There is no punishment high enough, great enough to lose all that time that they could have with their daughter. So I could imagine, despite how loving the mother was, that the parents want a maximum term. And in a lot of ways, that's absolutely reasonable. I mean, how would any of us feel if somebody snatched our child? Not you and me, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh, of course. I mean, 0 to 22 years on the kidnapping charge, and then she faces another 5 for interference with custody. But it just seems small compared to the fact that she stole someone's child for 18 years. On the flip side, like you said, the daughter has gone public with People magazine and other publications and said, listen, this woman was a great mom. She gave me a great life. She gave me everything I would have ever needed and wanted, and not to say I would have had a bad upbringing with my real parents. But I was lacking for nothing, and I would have had a very different life with them. And I think, so the daughter's clearly attached to this woman who she called mom and knew as mom for her entire life. This must be such a shock to her. But at the same time, she doesn't want to see this woman go away for 20 years. That seems like a lot, because to her, this is her mom who loved her for all of that time.
Right. It's so confusing. It's so difficult. And like I said, I think this should be a movie that we can get the rights to. There are so many different with this. If I had a daughter or the son, if this had happened to me, I would be doing the same thing if this person was absolutely loving to me and doing these things. But you know, with respect to the parents, there is no punishment great enough. They basically lost a child, and perhaps she'll always think of her non-biological parent as being the real parent, and how unfair is that to her actual parents?
Yeah, because they lost all of these years. I mean, they can never get these back. So they don't know what their child was like when she was a baby, when she was 2, 3, 4, 5. They missed literally every critical moment of her upbringing, and also lost the opportunity to shape her into the type of person that they would want to be and to be role models to her so that she would be like them, right? So now she's been raised by this woman, and she might have some of the characteristics of this woman, right? Because she was her role model. Let's listen to some testimony from earlier in the sentencing from Kamaya Mobley's biological mother. That testimony is just gut-wrenching. Adam, are you with me still?
Oh, it's so difficult to listen to. I mean, we all feel so much for this mother. It's the worst thing.
And when you look at the reaction of Gloria Williams, she doesn't seem to have much of a reaction, right? Which makes you think, like, boy, this woman really must have been a monster, despite the fact that the girl that she stole, her daughter, says that she was the greatest mother and she loves her. It's hard to reconcile the two, because you think, what kind of person would take a baby from another human being and live a lie like that for 18 years with no conscience?
Right. I mean, how can you not be empathetic to the biological mother? It's so horrible. You know, and all these years, she doesn't know what happened to her daughter. You know, is she alive? Is she not alive? I mean, what a torturous thing to have to live with. I mean, there's really no words for what she had to live through.
Now, she was 16 years old at the time, and so she saw Gloria Williams. Gloria Williams, she says, came into the room and pretended to be a nurse. Do you think the fact that she was 16, do you think there was any motive here that why Gloria Williams would target somebody like that?
It's totally confusing. You know, I don't know what to say. You know, maybe on that very day, you know, she always wanted to have a daughter, and she made a decision to, and she went in there, and that's the person that she saw, and the baby looked cute enough, and the mom seemed sweet or young, and maybe she thought she could do a better job. Whatever it is, it's completely freakish behavior, which is what we should expect from the craziness that we do and that happens in this country on Law and Crime.
Yeah. So when they're deciding how to sentence her, right? So how will all of this testimony factor in, do you think? And just sort of take us through the process of what will happen next.
Look, I think if I were the judge, this would be an incredibly difficult decision, because what happened to the mother, absolutely atrocious. But of course, the daughter's claiming that this person was you know, absolutely loving to her. But I could still see a judge meting out an extremely high punishment, you know, close to the maximum, if that's acceptable under the circumstances, and it probably would be here. It's such a difficult decision. The judge is probably, although not supposed to, is probably talking to the court reporter, his clerk, everybody. What do I do? What do I do? It's really surreal, right?
So let's listen to a little bit more of the testimony from earlier from Shania Mobley, who is the biological mother. Oh my gosh, Adam, are you still there? This is just gut-wrenching to listen to. I mean, I find myself tearing up here because, as this woman said, Shania Mobley, that she took her child, she took her bond, she took all of the experiences of that child's life. She missed prom, she missed basically everything for the first 18 years of her life.
Everything. She missed absolutely everything.
And she said the woman never apologized. She said she doesn't think she's sorry. She certainly didn't look sorry.
You know, that's really that's really incredible, and especially because she's going to undergo sentencing at some point, and she needs to be apologetic. Her only defense is to say yes, is to cry and to say this is the worst thing I've ever done, and I recognize that. I'm sorry for the pain that I've caused you. She's got to show something called remorse. You know, because that's going to affect her sentence as well. And if she doesn't do any of that, then, really what choice does the court have?
And we also heard earlier from a man named Charles Manico, and he thought he was the father of this child. He was paying child support for 18 years. Now he said he's happy because he loved this young girl and he thought that this was his daughter for all this time. So she deceived him as well. He thinks that she should be punished also.
It's totally mind-boggling. So, to say that this person's a loving parent, you're right. I mean, how does that gel with all these other things where she's sort of kind of a monster, kind of a sociopath, kind of, how
she deceived everybody, right? Everybody, the father, the daughter.
This is why I'm not going to get married. This is what I'm concerned about.
See, if you watch too many of these cases, it really does traumatize you.
Yes.
But
I'm traumatized right now. It's terrible. Yeah.
But what the mother said, Shannara Mobley, her justification for wanting this woman to get the maximum is she said, listen, now my daughter is with me every single day. I have my daughter back finally after 18 years. I want this woman as far away as possible from her because we know the daughter is still very attached to her. She has gone on all of the talk shows, Good Morning America, saying, this is my mom, I love her. She's not an animal. Don't lock her up and throw away the key. She's in touch with her every day. She's 18, so she has the freedom to do what she wants. She's probably going to go visit this woman in jail. It's going to be very hard to keep her away from this woman that she's known as mom, even if she gets the maximum.
Yeah, I mean, what a bitter pill to swallow and to have to live with, the affections that the daughter's going to have for a woman who robbed her biological mom of everything. What do you say? What do you say about any of this? It's terrible, and there's some really kind of screwy people out there. You got to be careful.
Yeah.
What can we say, Amy?
Let's transition back here to William Riley Gaul. So this was a football player in Tennessee who's accused of intentionally murdering his ex-girlfriend. We know that there was a rocky relationship between the two leading up to this, right? So there were a lot of text messages that night of the murder, a barrage of text messages and calls where he was trying to get her attention. And after that, a couple hours after that, that's when he shot through her home while she was sleeping and struck her in the back of the head with a bullet. Horrifically, her family had to find her the next morning. She didn't come out of her room, and they thought she was just sleeping. They didn't hear anything, right? So how does the fact that there were all of these text messages of him trying to get her attention, him saying, begging her, please just talk to me, how does that factor in to the prosecution's theory that, listen, this was intentional, this was planned, and there is some evidence of planning? I mean, when they found this guy, he was dressed all in black. They called him the man in black. So you see some steps here leading up to it where you think, well, maybe he planned this from the get-go. But then there's also sort of this volatile communication between the two of them. And you think, well, you could go the other way, and you could make an argument that this was a provocation.
Right. There's some sort of a heat of passion. So you have that coupled with the fact that he's in disguise. He doesn't want anyone to see him. He brings a weapon over. Despite all these other things, it only takes a second to form something called premeditation. And I think that, again, the defense has an uphill battle because, yes, there was some back and forth in the beginning, but, you can form your plan, in a split second. So I think the prosecution really has that with the fact that how he went there, how he didn't want to be seen. Nobody knew about this of the murder. I think it's a real difficult case for the defense. I understand that there's some back and forth and that he's a screwy person, and no one can not think that because clearly he's engaged in stalking type behavior. But it only takes a split second to come up with that premeditation.
And the legal definition under Tennessee law is that the prosecution will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he wanted her dead, right? And that he thought about the killing before actually committing it. There was an exercise of reflection and judgment prior to the act itself. The fact that he brought the gun with him, his grandfather's gun went missing, would that be enough to prove premeditation? Because that's an element of planning.
It's an element of planning, and also there were discussions earlier with respect to the gun and how do you hide fingerprints and whatnot. It seems like that all goes towards planning. Again, this would be a much better case if obviously maybe we wouldn't be here, maybe we would, if he didn't kill her, and it's a type of a reckless act where you sort of shoot at an inhabited dwelling, which is a strike here in California, and it's obviously very punishable where this offense is occurring. That would make it would more gel with their case if I'm just trying to scare her. But the fact that he hit her dead, dead to rights, killed her, shot her right in the head, that goes to, what are the chances of doing that? It sounds like he was trying to kill her.
So, yeah, Adam, thanks. So let's listen to some testimony earlier in this trial from the defendant's best friend, Isaac Ewers, who talks about what happened immediately after the killing. So, Adam, here you have the friend of the defendant saying that he pretended that he had been kidnapped, and then, he was sort of out of it when they saw him after that. He said that he had been hit in the head, but he didn't mention going to see Emma Walker. Why is this testimony important to the prosecution's case?
Well, it seems to show that there was some sort of plan to give, false information to assist, to help the defendant in this matter. It seems clear that it seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, and so do you think this is sort of like an assassination on his character, where they're showing, listen, this guy's not really with it. He's coming up with lies. So even if he were to take the stand in the future, you can't trust what he would say, right? You can't trust the defense. You can't trust the defense's theory. This guy was lying before. Even before the murder, he was coming up with all of these fake, dangerous scenarios that he could so-called rescue his girlfriend from. So he was a bit of a schemer.
Whatever he could come up with, I mean, it does sound like that this was his plan. And of course, he has to, he wants to do things to avoid getting in trouble for his conduct. And but you can, like I said, you can sort of see through everything because it seems so blatantly obvious. So it's a person that obviously can't be trusted, or that the defense is going to have a difficult time showing that they can. And in essence, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in this case, but it sounds like it's sort of going towards sealing the fate of the defendant in the eyes of the jurors.
Now, the prosecution is also trying to establish that he was somewhat of a stalker, that he was this infamous man in black who was caught on surveillance video. Now, the way they're trying to connect him to those previous episodes where you saw this man dressed all in black and he was around the area of her home and he was going to this area where he used to park when he visited her, is they're saying, well, after we caught him, he was wearing all black. He had on a black sweatshirt, black pants, black shoes. I mean, so this was that man in black in the surveillance video that we hadn't previously identified. Is that a strong enough connection, do you think? And also, are they trying to establish that he was a stalker to try to show that maybe this was a plan that had been in the works for a long time?
Well, you can show him being a stalker for a number of reasons. It shows him being, a really odd person. And, why couldn't a really strange person come, premeditate and decide to kill somebody? And it sounds like that's what happened in this case. And the mere fact that he wears these outfits, goes in all black, it indicates some type of planning. He's capable of doing these things. It doesn't sound like this is just sort of a spur of the moment thing. He's so odd. He knows what his prey is. He's stalking it. And that's what this jury's about. That's what the trial's about.
And in fact, even Emma Walker, the victim, had indicated that she was scared of him. She had changed her number. She had blocked him, and then he had called from an anonymous number. So he sort of was relentless. He wouldn't give up. The family grounded her, and they forbade her from seeing this guy because obviously they felt that there was something off about him as well.
He's the quintessential, version we have of the jaded, ex-boyfriend that's in a Wes Craven movie. He's so bizarre. You never want your daughter to date anyone after hearing about the facts of this case. what can you say?
Okay, so now he pled guilty to reckless endangerment, which carries a term of up to 15 years, right? So, and that's based on their theory that, listen, he fired this gun, but his intent was just to scare her, not to actually kill her, because then he wanted to swoop in and rescue her like a Prince Charming. Right, so, but why would they plead to that if it wasn't a plea deal that would get him that would escape the other charges? Meaning, why would they plead to that? And then they still have to go through the trial. And now it's like, okay, well, he's already pled to a lesser included. So the jury doesn't even have that option. You would think that if the jury had more options, maybe they would find him guilty of reckless endangerment. But if he's already pled to that, then what he's really on trial for is the murder. That's what they're determining. They're not even thinking about reckless endangerment.
Right, that was sort of my first thought. Was it to get into the good graces of the prosecution, as if they were going to say, okay, you know, we'll add a little bit more time. It won't just be this, you know, thank you for doing this, and this is what you're going to get. It's strange because, yeah, I would want, if I were the defense, you know, I don't have all the facts the defense attorney has, but I would assume that, well, my goal at least would be to get the jurors to hang their hat on something else, a lesser, and that's precisely what that would be. It's like, yes, you know, he engaged in, you know, reckless conduct. It resulted in death, but that's all it was. And by not giving the jurors the chance to do that, I really can't figure out this move by the defense.
Because it's not a deal, right, Adam? It's not like they're saying, okay, plead to reckless endangerment, the other charges go away. That's not the deal. So it's sort of like a layup for the prosecution, like, here, we're going to just give you this guilty plea on that charge, so you don't have to worry about proving that, right? And then we're going to pose this theory in our opening statements that this was all reckless endangerment, which he's already pled to. So essentially, they're asking the jurors to just throw away the other charges, because the prosecutors won't do it.
Yeah, I'm not exactly what, you know, all the discussions that have happened in chambers with the judge or, you know, on the record outside of earshot of the jury. Is there some reason that the defense may feel that they're going to be able to tell the jurors during closing that he's already pled to a specific charge, and that being reckless endangerment? Is the judge going to allow that? And is that why this occurred? I don't know.
Okay, so let's listen to some more testimony from some of his friends, because they have presented some pretty damaging testimony. Right after he allegedly killed Emma Walker, he did some bizarre things, and his friends decided to call the authorities. So that was defendant William Riley Gaul's friend Alex McCarty. And Adam, he was just talking about his behavior afterward. He said that Gaul actually admitted to stealing his grandfather's gun. Initially, he thought he was going to use it to commit suicide. Later on, a couple of the friends find out Emma is dead, and the circumstances surrounding her death are uncertain. And they immediately think about that gun, and they think about William Riley Gaul and his odd behavior, and they report him to the authorities. All of this strange behavior, you know, yes, you could say that this shows that he's a liar. This shows that he intended to kill. Listen, the defense does not deny that he intended to kill, right? But couldn't it also be spun the other way, which is what the defense is trying to do? And they're trying to say, listen, they said it in opening arguments. This guy's crazy. He's bizarre. He's reckless. But all of that strange behavior just supports our theory that this was a reckless act, that he was not a malicious killer.
Yes, you could certainly interpret the evidence that way. He's just sort of a really peculiar guy. And what do you do with a person who's peculiar? And the jurors are going to have to figure that out. The fact that he goes in disguise, wears all black, and does these things, it doesn't mean that a peculiar person can't also, you know, form the intent to premeditate. And the issue is going to be whether or not the jurors can say the prosecutor is proving premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. But
right,
if you're the defense attorney, yes.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's sort of the prosecution's theory here. They're saying, listen, the bullet was aimed to kill. That proves intent to kill. Yeah. The men in black thing, that he's all dressed up in this outfit, that alone, they're saying, also supports intent to kill.
Right. You know, just pick which one you want. You could say one is for, you know, intent to kill. The other one isn't. But the gun was used in the killing. Was the gun for? Did he briefly have a moment where he thought about committing suicide? I don't think that there's enough. There would be enough evidence to support that. But
oh, so you're
you know,
saying
you
that the
gotta,
defense could come in, Adam? You're saying the defense could come in and say, listen, he brought the gun with him not because he intended to kill her, but he intended to kill himself. We know they're already saying he brought the gun because he wanted to create a dangerous situation and rescue her from it. But they could also go the route of, well, he wanted to kill himself with it.
Sure. So it's part of a dangerous situation that his friends think perhaps he might be peculiar or suicidal, and then you have a direct kill shot to the victim in this case. You know, one shot, nobody hears anything. You know, in the middle of the night, it's a tough case.
Well, how critical is that? I mean,
I
how strong is that point by the prosecution that's saying, listen, this bullet was aimed to kill, it struck the victim, and he left? If he wanted to create a dangerous situation, wouldn't he call her? Wouldn't he text her to see if she was okay? It seems like he knew that she was dead, and he did nothing after to try to save her life, report it to authorities. So if this was a dangerous situation gone bad, why did he essentially try to escape and do nothing about it afterwards?
Right. You know, certainly if that wasn't his intent, you know, obviously, you know, he could have gone to the authorities after and said, I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean to do it. I was trying to scare her. I thought by doing that, she would see me as some kind of knight in shining armor. He didn't do any of those things.
Right. And so the fact that the prosecution, Adam, in the opening arguments, the prosecution told the jurors that he already pled to a reckless endangerment charge. Why would they do that?
Well, there you go. And that's sort of what I was thinking early on. Why else would you do something like that unless you could somehow inform the jury that you did it, to show that he's admitting bad conduct? And you know, and it goes directly to the theory of the defense's case, that it was designed to create a reckless situation. I'll plead to that, but I'm not going to plead to these other things. So I'm not the worst person in the world. I am admitting guilt, but I'm not going to admit to these other things because it wasn't in my mind to premeditate and murder. Right. So they wanted to get that in front of the jury, and then that was the reason. That's the only thing that's rational. That's a good decision by the defense.
Can they also use his sort of ineptitude in covering this up afterwards to help their defense, to say, listen, this guy was so shocked by what had just happened. That's why he told his friends, I stole my grandfather's gun. That's why he showed up wearing all black. I mean, he didn't exactly try to cover his trail afterwards.
You know, yeah. Again, you know, who knows how anyone's going to react after they do something. But it was a perfect kill shot, unfortunately, and I don't mean that in any good way. And it seems to be that this was, you know, the prosecution would argue that this was premeditated, regardless of, you know, what occurred afterwards and how he acted afterwards. Yes, he's strange, all that, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't premeditated. So there's going to be this sort of this conversation that we're having is going to be the same conversation they're going to have in the jury room. Is it enough for the jurors to say, hey, they proved it beyond reasonable doubt? Or, you know, could there be a couple hanging jurors saying, well, no, you know, I'm not convinced because of the behavior afterwards. Maybe he didn't mean to do this. So
right.
We'll
and we do have some activity in the courtroom. There's a sidebar between the judge and some of the attorneys, but when it resumes, we're going to hear Alex McCarty, who is a friend of his, continue his testimony, also expecting to hear his grandfather take the stand and say that his gun was stolen. I guess he has to sort of do that, right? Because they identified the grandfather's gun as the murder weapon. So he's got to say, it was not me. I did not give it freely, so I'm not an accessory to the crime. It was stolen from me. But he's got to testify against his own grandson.
Right. Still, you know, even though he has to say those things, I'm sure the jurors are thinking, gosh, well, you're even having the grandfather say something, which in a way helps the prosecution's case. What are we supposed to think about that?
Yeah, I apologize. Actually, I just want to correct. He did take the stand, the grandfather. That's what he said, that his gun was stolen. He took the stand yesterday. I believe I said it the opposite way that it was going to. But yeah, same idea here is that he had to do something like that, right, to establish that he had no involvement in this. But it's still a tricky situation.
Well, it is.
I think Adam's cutting out.
You know, someone else's gun. You know.
Adam, you're cutting out a little bit. Let's just go straight to the courtroom and listen to this trial in Tennessee. William Riley Gaul, who is accused of killing his ex-girlfriend, Emma Walker. She was 16 and a cheerleader in Tennessee. Okay, so we just listened to this video. Adam, I'm trying to decide whether this was damaging or not. So in the first instance, William Riley Gaul is telling his friends, they were, by the way, just to give some context, they were wired up by the police. They had already gone to the police, but he's telling them in this undercover video, lie to the police, essentially. If they ask you whether I had told you anything about the gun, just say that you were high or you were drunk or you were in some sort of altered state of mind, and you won't get in trouble. But then he goes on to deny that he killed Emma Walker. So what do you make of this?
How are you supposed to make any of it? It's kind of like the Tex MacGyver trial, when people talk to witnesses after the fact, and there's discussion about them saying, don't say this, say this. It's never helpful.
Right, but I mean, so on the one hand, he's trying to cover it up and saying, listen, he even says, quote, they're something to the effect of like, they're accusing me of killing her. What really gets to me, he says, I couldn't even bring myself to murder someone. What really gets to me is if she really did get shot through the wall, which is what the police told me, and why didn't the parents hear a gunshot at 3 a.m? So he's pretty much playing dumb that he knows nothing about this. But then he later goes on to admit through his attorneys in opening arguments that he did pull that trigger. And we know the gun that was used matched his grandfather's gun. So how will the jurors reconcile these denials to his friends with what he has now essentially admitted to but claims was an accident?
They'll reconcile them to a guilty verdict. That is my guess.
You're sure about that?
I mean, I'm not sure about that, but I'm kind of leaning that way. That's my sense.
We have a producer actually who's there at the trial. She has a sense that there's a good possibility there might be the jurors that feel in favor of reckless endangerment, that there might be some people on the jury that think, listen, this wasn't intentional. I have a question, though.
Sure.
Okay, so it's still unclear whether he was peering through a window when he fired the shot. We know he shot it through a wall in the home, right? But it struck her dead on. So, so if we don't know whether he actually peered over to see where she was situated and then lined up the gun, which is what the prosecution's saying, that he lined up the gun so that it was straight in line with her head, right? But there could also be an argument made on the other side that, listen, he was just recklessly firing this gun through the wall to scare her, and it just happened to hit her in the head and kill her.
I mean, what are the odds that there's a bullet that's only yay big, that it's perfectly, for whatever reason, it's perfectly in line with the victim's head, and it goes right there. It sort of seems like, you're not supposed to, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, not all possible or imaginary doubt. It seems to be it was a perfect, unfortunately perfect kill shot. And it seems to be that everything was lined up, and what can you say about that?
She was such a beautiful, young, vibrant girl who had her whole life ahead of her, and he too has a very innocent look to him. I mean, people may forget they're 18 and 16 years old. So for somebody at 18 to possess the mind of a killer, obviously not the first time we've seen something like that, but the videotape, how does that support that, listen, this guy was a malicious, psychopathic, sociopathic, however you want to diagnose him. I'm not a doctor, so I can't say, but how would it support the prosecution's theory that he intended to kill? It was premeditated, because you look on the one hand at his face, he looks so young and innocent, but then in the video we are seeing him talk about, listen, do you have the gloves? I need to get rid of the gun. He's essentially trying to cover it up while at the same time denying it, but he does not seem upset. Really at all. You can kind of see him like thinking, and the wheels are turning in his head, but he's not demonstrating any remorse.
Right. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be so rare that a lack of empathy, person who has a lack of empathy, like we just talked about another case, robs a mother of a child, or robs a mother of a child in death, which is what happened in this case. It doesn't matter, the appearance of the defendant. I've seen plenty of defendants that look very serene and very young, yet they're capable of horrible things. And the statutory, you're of age when you're 18 years old, and that's more or less universal, in all these cases across the country. So regardless of the age, and I understand that, with respect to the video, but you can't just look at the video in isolation. It's the video coupled with everything else. The defense is going to have as a very a big uphill battle here. And I don't see it going their way.
I mean, it's also pretty illustrative of his naivete when he's saying, listen, the cops don't know anything. If they did, I'd be arrested. Meanwhile, he's being recorded by his friends in an undercover sting.
No, it's incredible how naive some people are, as if other people don't have brains too, and can't figure things out, and don't have their own plans to ensnare the defendant in this case. So I feel like you've sort of seen it all, and it's surprising how naive and some people are, and perhaps the defendant is that naive, or perhaps he thought that playing dumb defense would was sophisticated. But looking at it from 10 or 30,000 feet, it's a person who looks like he's trying to do whatever he can to absolve himself from getting in trouble for this.
Even
right?
going so far at one point to say that he thought that she killed herself and that only he and the parents knew about that. So you see like a lot of different stories, narratives that he's come up with being tested almost with his friends. I believe we can listen in now to the trial. Can we hear that? Yes, we can. Okay, so let's go straight to that trial because I believe they're playing some more recordings from the friends.